So we're back on my Mgbgt autocrosser, getting it ready for its first drive on the new engine and new front suspension. Let's get going. So now that we've gotten the engine fired up and run it through its cam break-in procedure, I have gone back now and had it running a couple more times since then and just playing with the carb settings, trying to figure out what it wants right now on these particular needles to get the choke to work good from cold and fast idle and all that stuff. After we test drive it, I'm sure we're gonna have to probably do a little bit more tuning and decide whether these needles are actually going to be the appropriate needles or if I'm gonna have to change to something else. And we've got the timing set now to about 32 degrees total timing right now. I should be able to give it a couple more degrees than that, but I wanted to keep it a little more on the safe side for the moment until we test drive it and see what it actually wants. Now, I've gone ahead and drained back the coolant a little bit, put a new thermostat in it, and filled it back up, and I've changed the oil. Now, while it would be nice to have an oil filler cutter and be able to cut the filter open and take a look at it, I don't have one. But you can take a cutoff wheel, and if you're careful, you can cut right inside this little groove right here and just basically cut this roll right here out of it, and it will pop apart because that is above this plate, so you won't throw metal down into the oil filter. So I went ahead and did that so I can take a look at what we got in the oil filter. Now, I originally drained the oil into this container because it was a nice, clean, light color container, and I can see what we have. And as I could swirl it around, drain some off, there was a little bit of silver flake in there, but you know, more silvery look, but that's to be expected when you first break in an engine, and it wasn't a lot. It wasn't to the point where it gave me any concern. And we only saw a few tiny little specks here at the bottom, so that's not too bad. So we can go ahead and use this container to pull this oil filter apart. There's still a little bit of oil in there. I didn't completely drain the filter because we still want to see what's in the bottom of it without draining it all the way down and see what kind of specks and stuff we see, which not a lot of stuff. And what little is in there could have potentially been from me cutting it apart, but shouldn't have been. But we'll see what's in between here. We'll look in between the pleats here and see if there's anything of any concern, which at this point I'm not seeing too much of anything here. A couple little silvery specks here and there, but nothing to be too concerned about. So yeah, I think we're going to be good. So now we can just look at starting to take the car off the jack stands. Now I've gone in here and taken all these bolts back out, Loctited them all, made sure everything here was tight on the top and the bottom, got the calipers back on, brakes bled. But now the instructions for this coilover kit give you no initial adjustment for the spring here for the height. It actually says to assemble those with this nut all the way down at the bottom, which makes sense because you want the least amount of spring pressure you can have to assemble that initially. But then it says nothing beyond that. Then once you get the car on the ground, to have 35 millimeters between here, or no, centimeters, sorry, between here and here, once it's on the ground. But it says nothing about any kind of initial adjustment. And I would think if you're all the way down here, the car's going to sit way too low. And in my logic at least, I would expect that this thing would be engineered so that at normal stock ride height, this adjustment will be somewhere closer to the middle of the screw here, the threaded portion, and that the lowest possible usable ride height would put this thing high enough that you can at least get the tool in here to do adjustments, because with that thing all the way down there, you can't. So I ended up adjusting it up a little bit before I connected everything together. And what I did was I put this 3/4 of an inch up from the bottom of that screw up to the bottom of the threaded portion, because that's the height at which you could actually get the tool in here. Of course, you'd have to get it from the back side because this isn't a way to actually turn it. So my guesstimate is this thing, once we put it on the ground, should still be a little bit too low, and I'll have to raise it up some. Because this thing is a street car primarily for what I use it for. So I generally keep my ride height pretty close to stock, but we'll have to get it on the ground and find out. So all right, now we'll get this thing off these jack stands. Already got the back off. And we'll drop it on the ground and see where it sits. Now in my car with this spoiler, I can never drop it straight down. I always have to take the jack and put the handle over here so I don't damage the spoiler. Woo! Looks like it's going to sit a little higher than I expected it would, but I won't know until we go drive it where it's going to settle in at. But I did expect it to sit lower than this, just setting it down. Well, after pushing down on it a little bit, it did settle a little bit more, but like I said, we won't know where it's actually going to sit at until I go drive it, because the back's not going to settle then either. Now, I'll initially set this thing to the same ride height as in my notes from when I scaled it 3 years ago, getting ready to go out a crossing. And that'll be my starting point. But I won't know where it'll actually end up at until after driving it a little bit and scaling it again to see where the weight's at. A quick check of the ride height, it's actually a lot closer than I thought it was going to be, so we're really in the ballpark there. I'll check it again after we drive it and be sure. My seats aren't ready yet, but what I did was I just got this old crappy seat. It actually doesn't even look as bad as the one I took out. That was just sitting up on the shelf, and I'd throw that in there really quick just so I can go test drive it. And we'll make sure everything's good on it. I just have the steering wheel on here just loose right now, and once I determine if it's straight, then I got my ratchet with me. I'll just snug it up. If not, then I'll just take it off, move it to where I think it's where it is straight, and then I'll tighten it down. So I don't have a camera mount in this car. This is for the GoPro, and the GoPro is not charged right now. So if I can figure out how to mount the camera in the car without it shaking so much that it makes you guys seasick, I'll see if I can get it mounted in here and get some in-car footage. idle situation we gotta address. Well, after test driving it, the steering wheel was straight as it was. We did have some minor issues with the throttle levers kind of hanging slightly and not coming back down to idle, and we've got that sorted out now. Other than that, it's running nice and cool, sitting at 170 while I was driving, but once it was sitting out in the sun idling, it's a warmer day today, the temperature was starting to creep up a little bit at idle, so we're going to have to do a little bit more fine tuning, double check, make sure that we're not running a bit lean at idle, and see where the timing is at idle. Because yes, even though my total timing looks pretty good, if the timing at idle is off, it can make it run hot at idle. So we got to double check both ends of the timing and just do some fine tuning. So I would still call that a pretty fair success.